Trapped in the merciless heart of the Sonoran Desert, a powerful executive faces his own fragility. His sleek SUV, a monument to his success, is devoured by relentless sand. As the sun's unyielding blaze erodes his hope, a humble Latino mechanic in a battered pickup emerges from the shimmering haze, offering aid without hesitation. Yet as heat, pride, and survival collide, neither man knows this chance encounter will not only save a life, but forge a bond that reshapes their futures. Before we dive into this journey, tell us, what's the strangest place you've ever been stranded? Share your stories in the comments, and let's connect over life's unexpected trials. The Sonoran Desert sun was a brutal sovereign, its heat a molten tide that seemed to dissolve the very edges of the world. The sky stretched vast and unforgiving, a cruel blue void unbroken by clouds, humming with the faint, mournful pulse of an earth baked into silence. Cacti stood like weathered guardians, their spines glinting in the glare, while every stone and grain of sand trembled under the weight of the inferno. Inside a gleaming silver Range Rover, Edward Langley IV gripped the steering wheel, his fingers taut, knuckles pale against the dark leather. His tailored grey suit, flawless hours earlier at a high-stakes Phoenix summit, clung to his frame, sodden with sweat. His face, usually a mask of polished control, cracked under the strain. Sweat traced rivulets down his brow, his jaw clenched in a silent war against frustration. Edward, a titan of industry, was unaccustomed to defeat, his life a carefully orchestrated symphony of power. But here, in this desolate crucible where each breath felt like inhaling fire, his authority was as fleeting as a desert breeze. The GPS had dangled a shortcut, a narrow, unpaved trail snaking off the highway, promising to shave time from his journey. Warnings about unmaintained terrain flashed, but Edward, fueled by hubris and the urgency of a man who bent the world to his will, ignored them. No desert path could defy a Range Rover, he thought, nor challenge the man who'd outmaneuvered rivals and markets alike. Yet the desert played by its own rules. Within 15 minutes, the sand beneath his tires turned treacherous, shifting from firm to a soft, clutching mire. The wheels dipped, a subtle warning, but Edward, irritation flaring, pressed the accelerator harder. The tires spun, kicking up clouds of dust, then sank deeper, the SUV's heavy frame slumping until its undercarriage kissed the earth. Now trapped in the motionless vehicle, Edward felt it tilt forward, a fallen beast yielding to the sand's embrace. His phone displayed no signal, its blank screen a mocking reminder of his isolation. An empty water bottle rolled on the passenger seat, discarded in haste. His face flushed, not just from the heat, but from a fury he couldn't tame, a rage at the world, at himself, for being so utterly powerless against something as simple as dirt. Stepping out, the heat struck like a physical blow, wrapping his chest in a vice, stinging his eyes, and blurring the endless expanse of gold and desolation. The desert sprawled infinitely, a shimmering sea of peril offering no shade, no refuge, only the promise of oblivion. Panic crept in, slow and insidious, like a shadow stretching across his mind. Edward scanned the barren trail, praying for a passing vehicle. But the silence was suffocating, broken only by the thud of his own heartbeat. He paced beside the SUV, his polished shoes sinking into the sand, his mind racing through useless strategies, deals he could broker, calls he could make, if only the world hadn't abandoned him here. Then through the wavering heat haze, a speck appeared, a vehicle crawling steadily closer. Edward squinted, a fragile hope kindling, his breath catching as he dared to believe rescue was near. But as the shape resolved into a battered pickup truck, its paint chipped and faded, his optimism flickered. This wasn't the polished roadside assistance he'd envisioned, not by a long shot. Behind the truck's grimy windshield, Javier Morales leaned forward. His dark eyes narrowed against the sun's glare. His face, etched by years under relentless suns, glistened with sweat beneath a worn baseball cap, its logo faded to a ghost. His green work shirt, stained with grease and time, hung loosely on his sturdy frame, a testament to a life of labor. The truck coughed and rattled as he pulled alongside the stranded Range Rover. his gaze swiftly cataloguing the scene. The luxury vehicle mired in sand, the crumpled suit, the blend of defiance and fear etched across Edward's features. Javier felt the man's unease, a silent wall of distrust that had little to do with the desert's cruelty. He'd seen that look before, on faces that judged his worn clothes, his calloused hands, his very existence. But out here, survival erased lines of class or color. With a slow, deliberate nod, Javier parked, grabbed a half-empty water jug from the passenger seat, his last reserve for the long drive home, and stepped into the blistering heat, the sand burning through the soles of his scuffed boots. Javier approached the SUV, each step measured, the sun hammering his shoulders like a relentless forge. His face, slick with perspiration, held a calm born of countless hard days, a resilience that knew worry solved little, but kindness could mean everything. The jug sloshed faintly in his hand, its contents precious, rationed for his journey to his sister's home, where medical bills loomed like a storm cloud. Edward sat rigid in his seat, his posture a fortress, his hand hovering near the door lock, a reflex of suspicion carved deep by a life of guarded privilege. Javier stopped a few feet away, raising the jug like a quiet offering, his voice rough but warm, carrying over the heavy air. "Looks like you're in a bind, amigo. Could use a hand." Edward's eyes darted from the jug to Javier's sun-weathered face, his instincts wrestling with an old, bitter discomfort. He'd built walls against men like this, men who didn't fit his world of boardrooms and wealth. Swallowing hard, he cracked the door just enough to speak, his tone sharp. "I've got roadside assistance on the way." "I'm fine." Javier's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, not mocking, but seasoned by years of hearing pride mask desperation. He tilted his cap back and gestured at the empty horizon. "No cell towers for miles out here. That sun's not waiting for anyone. Let me check it out before you bake." Edward's pride battled the gnawing fear in his gut. The heat clawed at his neck, his tongue thick and dry. The truth inescapable, no one else was coming. He thought of his empire back in Phoenix, the deals, the power, the control, all meaningless here. After a long, brittle pause, he nodded curtly, more to himself than to Javier, and pushed the door open fully. The heat slammed into him, a punishing wave that blurred his vision and scorched his lungs. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the SUV, his polished exterior crumbling under the desert's weight. Standing together, they were opposites carved in stark relief. Edward, tall but wilting, his tailored suit a useless relic, his face pale with exhaustion. Javier, stocky and grounded, his threadbare clothes practical, his movements steady as stone, his dark skin glistening under the sun's assault. Javier crouched by the front tire, his calloused fingers probing the sand's softness, muttering softly as he assessed the damage. "You're sunk good," he said, standing and dusting his hands. "Need to dig out, lower the tire pressure, maybe use my mats." "It's gonna be a slog." Edward blinked, the terms alien. But the word slog landed like a stone, a reminder of his helplessness. Javier offered the jug again, his tone firm. "Drink first. You're sweating rivers, and if you collapse, we're both stuck." Edward's hands trembled as he took it, gulping the cool water, its relief sharp and humbling. He muttered a grudging thanks, avoiding Javier's gaze, shame prickling beneath his skin for needing this man's charity. Javier trudged to his truck, returning with a shovel, worn traction mats and a tire gauge, dropping them onto the sand with a soft thud. He dug without preamble, his strokes powerful and rhythmic, sweat streaming down his arms like rivers carving stone. Each scoop was a quiet defiance of the desert's cruelty, a testament to a life spent fixing what others deemed broken: cars, dreams, hope. Edward lingered awkwardly, watching Javier's steady rhythm, then tried to help, scooping sand with his hands until the heat overwhelmed him. His vision swam, his breath shallow, and he stumbled back to the SUV, gasping, the desert's weight crushing his chest. Javier glanced over, his expression unreadable, but his pace quickened, muscles straining under the relentless sun. He thought of his sister, her frail frame. The hospital bills piling up, stopping to help, wasn't just instinct. It was who he was. even when it cost him. The water jug sat between them, its contents dwindling, the plastic softening in the heat. Javier picked it up, shook it, and handed it to Edward without a word. Edward drank deeply, guilt flaring as he realized Javier was giving up his own share. "I'm good," Javier said, forcing a grin, his voice rough with thirst. "Grew up in this furnace. You need it more." Edward lowered the jug, meeting Javier's eyes. A flicker of respect stirring, a dawning awareness that he'd misjudged this man from the start. Javier adjusted the tire pressure, the SUV hissing softly as air escaped, the sound swallowed by the desert's roar. He positioned the traction mats under the wheels, packing sand tightly with practiced hands, his shirt clinging like a second skin, his breaths short but steady. Every movement was a testament to a strength that needed no applause, forged in years of labor that demanded everything and gave little in return. Edward watched, useless but transfixed, as Javier worked with quiet certainty, a man who'd faced harder days and still chose kindness. "Why do you do this?" Edward blurted, the words escaping before he could stop them. Javier paused, wiping his brow, his gaze steady. "My pops taught me, out here you don't leave someone behind. Doesn't matter who they are." Edward swallowed, the simplicity of it piercing something deep within him. Finally, Javier stood, brushing sand from his jeans with heavy slaps, his chest heaving. He opened the driver's door and gestured for Edward to climb in. "Slow and easy," Javier said, his voice steady despite the strain. "Let the tires catch. We've got this, amigo." Edward nodded, his hands shaky as he gripped the wheel, glancing at Javier standing just outside, ready to guide him. Edward eased the gas pedal, the SUV lurching, wheels spinning, then gripping the mats. The vehicle shuddered, inching forward. Javier jogging alongside, shouting encouragement over the engine's growl. "Keep it steady. You're good!" His voice a lifeline in the chaos. Edward's heart pounded, his hands slick with sweat, but he followed Javier's lead, trusting him in a way he hadn't trusted anyone in years. After tense moments, the Range Rover broke free, rolling onto firmer sand with a sudden ease. Edward slammed the brakes, his chest heaving, his mind reeling with relief and something deeper, awe at the man who'd made this possible. Javier slapped the hood lightly, his smile exhausted but triumphant, relief shining brighter than the sun. Edward stepped out, legs unsteady, and looked at Javier, really looked at him, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as a man who'd poured everything into saving someone he owed nothing. Javier swayed, his body protesting the heat and effort, and Edward, without thinking, reached to steady him. Their hands clasped, the contact raw and electric, a silent exchange of gratitude and respect forged in the desert's fire. No words passed, but the moment held a truth neither could deny, born not of shared status, but of shared humanity. The sun began its slow descent, casting jagged shadows across the sand, though the heat clung like a second skin. Javier wiped his brow, his movements sluggish, every muscle screaming from the ordeal. His thoughts drifted to his sister, to the long drive ahead, to the jug now nearly empty, but he felt no regret, only a quiet certainty that he'd done right. Edward stood beside him, his suit caked with dust, its sharp lines lost to the desert's chaos. Silence settled, heavy and profound, broken only by the faint tick of the cooling engine, and the desert's restless whisper. Edward studied Javier, the deep fatigue in his eyes, the cracked skin on his knuckles, the quiet dignity that radiated despite exhaustion. Shame burned in Edward's chest, hot and sharp for the walls he'd built, the assumptions he'd carried like armor. He thought of the deals he'd closed, the empires he'd built. None of it had prepared him for this, for a man who gave without asking, who saw him not as a title, but as a human in need. Javier broke the silence, his voice rough but light, offering Edward an out. "You're good now. Stick to the highway. This sand's a liar." Edward nodded, words catching in his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "I owe you my life." Javier shook his head, his smile gentle but firm. "It's not about debts. Out here we look out for each other. That's the deal." Edward reached into his SUV, fumbling in a small cooler for a chilled water bottle, the last of his reserves. He offered it to Javier, a gesture heavy with unspoken meaning. his hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what it meant to accept help and now give it back. Javier took it, sipped carefully, his dark eyes meeting Edward's in a moment of quiet understanding. He handed it back, a silent pact forming in the shimmering air. For the first time in years, Edward smiled, a real, unguarded smile that felt awkward but warm in his chest, like a muscle long unused. He extended his hand, not as a titan of industry, but as a man humbled by grace. Javier grinned, clasping it firmly, their grip a bridge across a chasm neither had expected to cross. "You're not what I thought," Edward said softly, the admission raw. Javier chuckled, his voice low. "Most folks aren't, once you see 'em clear." The desert wind swirled, carrying dust and the faint promise of redemption, and Edward felt something crack inside, a wall of pride giving way to a truth he hadn't faced until now. Phoenix's skyline shimmered against the dusk as Edward pulled into his gated estate, the sleek gates parting silently to welcome him. The mansion's marble facade, manicured lawns, and soft glow of wealth should have anchored him, but they felt hollow, like a stage set for a life he no longer fully recognized. The desert's heat, Javier's steady hands, and his selfless act clung to Edward like a second shadow, refusing to fade. Inside his sprawling study, surrounded by polished oak and leather, he sank into his chair, staring at the city's glittering sprawl. Javier's weary smile, his cracked hands, his quiet strength played in his mind, a vivid loop that challenged everything he'd valued. Edward had built an empire, measuring worth in dollars and deals. But Javier's gift defied such metrics, priceless, unquantifiable. For the first time, he didn't want to write a check and move on. He wanted to act with purpose, to honor the man who'd saved him without asking for a dime. The idea took root slowly, like a seed breaking through parched earth, then grew with fierce clarity. Edward grabbed his phone, his voice sharp as he issued orders to his assistant, legal team and trusted contacts. The machinery of his influence roared to life, and by the next evening his plan was set. A week later, Javier Morales stepped onto the sagging porch of his modest home, blinking at a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, its polished surface glinting in the morning sun. A suited man handed him an envelope with a curt nod. "From Mr. Langley," he said, his tone professional but clipped. Javier opened it cautiously, his calloused fingers tracing the edges, finding keys, legal documents, and a note in Edward's precise hand. "You gave me a second chance. Let me offer you one. The shop is yours, free and clear, with something extra for your family as you cared for me." Edward. The deed named a state-of-the-art repair shop in downtown Phoenix, fully equipped with top-tier tools ready for business. A trust fund ensured his sister's medical care, a lifeline for her chronic illness that had drained their savings for years. Javier stood frozen, the papers trembling in his hands, the weight of the gesture stealing his breath. He thought of his sister's smile, of the years spent scraping by, of the hope this could bring. He glanced at the sedan, sensing Edward's presence behind the tinted glass, not settling a score, but extending something rare and real. A disbelieving laugh broke from Javier's chest, loosening the tight knot of struggle that had bound him for so long. He looked to the wide sky, the same one that had borne witness to their desert ordeal, and murmured a prayer of thanks, not just for the gift, but for the instinct that had led him to stop for a stranger. Inside the sedan, Edward watched, a warm, unguarded smile spreading across his face, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. He'd spent a lifetime chasing victories. But this felt like something deeper, something right in the months that followed. Edward and Javier's lives intertwined, not by chance, but by a shared vow to nurture what began in the desert's crucible. At the shop's opening, they stood shoulder to shoulder, not for cameras, but to pledge that no one in need would be turned away. They repaired cars for struggling families. I taught mechanics to at-risk youth, and offered free services to veterans and the homeless, their work rippling outward like a stone in a still pond. One evening, as the sun dipped low, bathing Phoenix in amber light, they stood outside the shop, it grease-stained and weary, sharing a quiet laugh over a stubborn engine they'd conquered together. Edward, once defined by his empire, found purpose in the work. His perspective shifted by Javier's example. Javier, long accustomed to fighting alone, discovered strength in partnership. His dreams no longer bound by scarcity. Their story spread not as a tale of charity, but as proof of what's possible when humanity triumphs over division. The shop became a beacon, a place where second chances were forged, where people left not just with fixed cars, but with renewed hope. Together, Edward and Javier proved that kindness, given freely, could reshape the world. One small act at a time, their bond, a testament to the power of seeing beyond differences to the heart of what makes us human. Join us to share stories that stir the soul by liking and subscribing. Hit the notification bell to start each day with lessons of courage, connection, and the quiet power of compassion.